because they were going to take the largest organ in my body and pull it out and put another one in. I mean, God. Well, yeah, I had in the last 3.5 years, I've had 4 surgeries, and I tell you, that'll make everything stop, so you can just think about stuff. Chances are you might not be here.
When news broke of Gregg Allman's passing in 2017, fans were heartbroken. But almost immediately, whispers of something deeper began to spread. Was his death as straightforward as reported? Did he suffer more than anyone knew? Had he kept secrets in his final days? The rumors refused to fade. And then came a revelation no one saw coming. His ex-wife finally spoke out. What she revealed shattered assumptions and confirmed suspicions that had lingered for years.
And that I was married to Gregory. Oh my God, people hated that. Yeah.
And you knew it?
Hated us being together.
Yeah.
His people hated it, my people hated it.
Yeah.
What was hidden from the public? Why did some believe there was more to the story? And what did Gregg himself know about his fate before the end? We are about to uncover the truth that changes everything. But before we reveal what happened, we need to understand who Gregg Allman was. Gregg Allman's story begins in Nashville, Tennessee, where he was born on December 8, 908 to 47. But his childhood was far from easy. When he was just 2 years old, tragedy struck. Their father, Willis Allman, was murdered by a stranger he had offered a ride to. That moment changed everything for the Allman family. Gregg and his older brother Dwayne were left without a father, and their mother, Geraldine, struggled to raise them alone. Seeking a fresh start, she moved the boys to Florida, where they would unknowingly take their first steps toward rock and roll history. From an early age, Gregg and Dwayne were inseparable. They did everything together, but nothing fascinated them more than music. Blues records filled their home, and artists like Muddy Waters and B.B. King became their idols. Unlike other kids their age, they weren't just casual listeners, they studied the music, breaking it down note by note. Gregg was drawn to the soulful, emotional side of blues, while Dwayne was obsessed with mastering the guitar. The brothers knew they were different. Music wasn't just entertainment for them, it was survival. Their first real exposure to live music came when Gregg was about 10 years old. He saw a man playing guitar at a friend's house and was immediately captivated. That was the moment he knew he had to learn. But guitars weren't cheap, and money was tight. Gregg took on odd jobs, paper routes, washing cars, whatever he could to save up for his first guitar. By the time he finally had one in his hands, there was no turning back. The Allman Brothers were about to make noise. In high school, they started performing in small bands, but their real break came when they formed a group called the Allman Joys in the mid-1000s, 960s. They hit the road, playing in small clubs and bars across the South. It was grueling. The pay was terrible, the drives were long, and they often slept in their car. But they were chasing something bigger than comfort. By 1969, after years of grinding through the music scene, Gregg and Dwayne took a leap of faith. They officially formed the Allman Brothers Band. The lineup included Dickie Betts, Berry Oakley, Butch Trucks, and Jai Hohani Jai Moi Johansson. They settled in Macon, Georgia, signing with Capricorn Records, and finally had a chance to prove themselves. But success didn't come overnight. The band's early days were brutal. Money was still tight, and the music industry didn't quite know where to place them. They weren't strictly blues, nor were they traditional rock. Their sound was raw, unpredictable, and deeply Southern. What they lacked in mainstream appeal, they made up for in sheer intensity. On stage, they played like their lives depended on it, because, in many ways, they did. Then came the turning point. In 1971, they released their live album at Fillmore East. The album was electric, capturing the raw energy of their performances. It was a defining moment, not just for the band, but for rock music itself. Critics and fans alike couldn't ignore Gregg's voice. Deep, soulful, and haunting, it carried the weight of everything he had been through. With At Fillmore East, the Allman Brothers Band had officially arrived. But just as success arrived, tragedy struck, changing Gregg's life forever. On October 29, 1971, everything changed. Dwayne Allman, the heart of the Allman Brothers Band, was gone. He had been riding his motorcycle through Macon, Georgia, when he swerved to avoid a truck. He lost control, and, in an instant, one of rock's greatest guitarists was taken away. He was just 24 years old. For Gregg, the loss was unbearable. His brother wasn't just family, he was his other half. They had fought, struggled, and built a life together through music. Now that life felt empty. Gregg walked into the hospital that night, hoping for a miracle. But Dwayne was already gone. His grief was overwhelming, and for the first time, he found himself truly alone. The band was shattered. Dwayne had been their leader, their driving force. Without him, it felt like there was no reason to go on. But in the weeks that followed, something incredible happened. Instead of falling apart, they did what Dwayne would have wanted. They played. They turned their pain into music, pouring their emotions into their performances. Gregg, in particular, was torn between two worlds. On stage, he was strong, delivering some of his most powerful performances. But offstage, the weight of loss was suffocating. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and when the silence became too much, he turned to drugs and alcohol. In early 1972, the band released Eat a Peach, an album that served as both a tribute and a farewell to Dwayne. The songs carried an unmistakable sadness, but they also celebrated the spirit of a man who had given everything to music. Tracks like Ain't Wasting Time No More and Melissa were filled with longing, and the album was a success, proving that the band could survive without Dwayne. But surviving wasn't the same as thriving. The loss had created a wound that never fully healed. By the time they released Brothers and Sisters in 1973, the Allman Brothers Band had become one of the biggest names in rock. Songs like Ramblin' Man and Jessica dominated the airwaves, and the band was playing to massive crowds. On the outside, they were at the top of their game, but behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Gregg was spiraling. The pain of losing Dwayne never faded, and the only way he knew how to cope was by numbing himself. Alcohol and heroin became his escape. His bandmates saw the changes. He was showing up late, forgetting lyrics, and isolating himself. But the machine had to keep moving. The more success they found, the harder it became to stop. The grief, the addiction, and the pressure of fame created a dangerous combination. The band started fighting more than ever, and relationships within the group became strained. Dwayne had been their glue, and without him, everything was unraveling. Gregg once admitted that he spent years trying to fill the void his brother left behind, but no amount of music, money, or substances could bring Dwayne back. And while his grief was all-consuming, his personal life was about to become just as chaotic. But Gregg's battles weren't just with grief, his love life was just as chaotic. Gregg Allman was a man of passion, and that passion extended far beyond music. He fell in love easily, but love never seemed to last. 6 marriages, 6 attempts to find stability, and 6 heartbreaks. His relationships were as intense as his music, filled with highs, lows, and plenty of chaos. But out of all his romances, one stood out the most: Gregg and Cher. It was the relationship no one saw coming. She was a pop icon, polished and glamorous. He was a southern rock legend, wild and unpredictable. Their worlds couldn't have been more different, but when they met in 1975, the attraction was instant. From the start, it was a roller coaster. 9 days after their wedding in Las Vegas, Cher filed for divorce. She had seen Gregg's heroin addiction up close, and it terrified her. But just as quickly as they fell apart, they came back together. They tried to make it work, even recording a duet album, To the Hard Way, under the name Allman, and it was a disaster. The album flopped, and critics tore it apart. Their musical styles didn't blend, and neither did their lifestyles. Cher was disciplined and business-minded, while Gregg was impulsive and lived in the moment. Their fights were just as intense as their passion. Cher later admitted, Gregg was the kindest, sweetest man when he was sober, but when he wasn't, it was impossible. She fought to save him from his addictions, but in the end, it was too much. They divorced in 1979, but not before having a son, Elijah Blue Allman. Gregg's relationships never seemed to last, but he never gave up on love. His other marriages followed a similar pattern: passion, turbulence, and inevitable collapse. He had 5 children from different relationships, and while he wasn't always the most present father, he loved them deeply. He later reflected on his struggles with family, admitting that fame had taken its toll. He was always on the road, always chasing music, and that meant missing out on moments he could never get back. His children grew up watching him battle addiction, fight through failed marriages, and struggle to balance the rock star life with fatherhood. Despite it all, they adored him. His son Devon followed in his musical footsteps, leading the band Honey Tribe and keeping the Allman legacy alive. Elijah, though more distant, carried the weight of being the son of 2 music legends. As the years passed, Gregg's love life remained chaotic, but he never stopped searching for something real. His final marriage to Shannon Williams in 2017 seemed different. She stood by him through his worst health battles, offering him the kind of support he had never truly found before. But while Gregg had spent years fighting for love, his greatest battle was still ahead. The years of addiction and hard living had taken their toll, and his body was finally giving out. But none of these struggles compared to the real battle, his declining health. Gregg Allman had lived hard, and his body paid the price. Decades of substance abuse had left permanent damage, and by the 1990s, his health was already in decline. But in 2007, doctors confirmed his worst fear. He had hepatitis C. The disease had been silently attacking his liver for years, and by the time it was diagnosed, the damage was severe. He tried to fight it, but the years of drinking and drug use had left his body weak. In 2010, the situation became critical. His liver was failing, and without a transplant, he wouldn't survive. The odds weren't in his favor, but somehow he got a second chance. A donor's liver became available, and Gregg underwent a life-saving transplant. For a while, it seemed like he had beaten the worst of it. He spoke openly about his gratitude, telling fans he was determined to take better care of himself. But those close to him knew the truth. Gregg couldn't escape the damage that had already been done. Then, in 2017, came the final blow. Liver cancer, a death sentence. The man who had spent a lifetime outrunning his demons had finally run out of road. When the news of his illness became public, fans were devastated, but almost immediately, rumors began to spread. Some believed Gregg had been hiding just how sick he was. Others speculated that doctors had known about his condition long before it was announced, but kept the truth from the public. Why was the information revealed so late? Had he known he was dying for longer than anyone realized? Then his ex-wife spoke out, hinting at something even more unsettling. She suggested that Gregg had been preparing for the end long before anyone else suspected. He had made peace with his fate, but he didn't want the world to know. Had he kept his suffering a secret to protect his fans? Did he choose to keep the details private because he didn't want pity? The speculation grew, but Gregg himself never answered the questions. He continued performing for as long as he could, refusing to let his illness define him. Even in his final months, he insisted on recording new music, leaving behind a parting gift for his fans. Those who saw him during his last performances noticed the change. He was thinner, weaker, and at times visibly struggling. But he pushed through, determined to do what he had always done, play music until he had nothing left to give.